Welcome to the J Spot Lounge, peeps, where walls growl truth and history refuses to be decor. In tonight's episode titled Segregation, Rebranded, A New American Mirror, I will revisit a piece that I penned a decade ago titled The Self-Segregation of Black America. In it, I examined what happens when integration becomes a broken promise and Black Americans, disillusioned but dignified, begin to exit stage left. Fast forward to now, across this fractured landscape, we see communities cropping up that proudly proclaim whites only, a phrase that echoes with the ghost of George Wallace and the grip of systemic nostalgia. But this is not just a rehash of the past. It's a rebranding of racial division dressed in zoning laws, HOA covenants, and coded language. In this lounge, we'll unpack how these movements reflect and distort the ongoing racial story of America. We'll examine whether self-segregation is rebellion, retreat, or revelation. And we'll ask what happens when both exit signs point away from one another. Let's get right to it, shall we? So before I begin, let me preface this by saying, as I said, I wrote this article 10 years ago, but I want you to hear it as it relates to what you see with your own two eyes in present day America. I'm not going to change any of the words as I read it that I wrote 10 years ago. But this article is about us self-segregating, just as we're talking about criticizing what whites are doing today. Albeit, what I was speaking about, us doing it, was for totally different reasons, perhaps, and with totally different methods, whether they be conscious or subconscious. So here we go. In his 1963 inaugural speech, Alabama Governor-elect George Wallace said, quote, "In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever," unquote. Now, though Wallace would later apologize for the words, conventional wisdom would suggest that Black America might just accomplish Wallace's utopian wish. The majority of Black American social thought of present-day America represents an eclectic blend of various solutions regarding the institutions of American racism. Unfortunately, none would have appeared to be successful. And while the viewpoints of Black America play out buffet style, attitudes towards Blacks remain steadfast despite the morphing face of America. Looking through the store window from Rationale Street affords one the luxury of a quasi-buyer's remorse sense of righteous indignation. Blacks bought integration in the 60s, tried it on in the 70s, realized integration didn't fit in the 80s, sent it to the tailor in the 90s, and now in the 2000s are making every effort to return it, minus the wrappings and the receipt. What is worse is that there exists no store to which to return it. Thus, in lieu of the inability to return integration, Blacks have decided, as the courts would say, to constructively evict themselves from society. However, in the midst of this constructive eviction / self-segregation, questions arise concerning cause, effect, and intent. Intentions notwithstanding, the term self-segregation evokes for some images of a reversal of blood-bought progress, and while for others, a welcome come to Jesus moment. For example, the remaining remnants of black nationalists, whose originators, according to Northwestern University professor Sterling Stuckey, PhD, quote, emphasized the need for black people to rely primarily on themselves in vital areas of life, economic, political, religious, and intellectual, in order to effect their liberation. Sounds like he's channeling Black Wall Street. Authors Bracy, Meyer, and Rudwick argue in their book, Black Nationalism in America, that, quote, the concept of racial solidarity is essential to all forms of black nationalism, unquote, and that, quote, no ideological or programmatic implications exist beyond the desire that black people organize themselves on the basis of their common color and oppressed condition to move in some way to alleviate their situation, unquote. However, given our familiarity with the situation blacks were attempting to alleviate, we must once again ponder what intent, if any, lies in this present-day self-segregation of Black America. Despite the fact that nationalism as a doctrine manifested in the North, nationalism originated in the South. It was there in the South during the 19th century that Africans banded together in an effort to distance themselves from forced assimilation, refusing for many years to refer to themselves as Americans. Subsequently, the South represents in 21st century America the obvious choice for research pertaining to segregation and its effects on blacks. In 2012, researchers from Dartmouth, the University of Georgia, and the University of Washington released a comparative study of trends in racial diversity. Employing data obtained from the U.S. Census in 1990, 2000, and 2010, the study found that although racial diversity in the nation's largest cities has been on the rise over the last several decades, African Americans remain concentrated in segregated neighborhoods. That highly diverse neighborhoods are actually rare. And newly arrived immigrants continue to settle in concentrated residential patterns. The research published in the Professional Geographer presented substantial evidence of changes in neighborhood racial configuration in major cities. In addition, the research found that while there are no longer all black or all white neighborhoods in major U.S. cities, segregation still exists. According to the Dartmouth geography professor Richard Wright, quote, it is clear from our research that we still have problems with segregation, unquote. Atlanta, Georgia, for example, according to Wright, is a city that has changed dramatically over the last 20 years, yet remains segregated. He added, Wright did, quote, the trend we've seen is for predominantly white tracts to become more racially diverse, and this is because of immigration. African Americans have a longer history of settlement in the United States. So old histories are getting rewritten in these metropolitan areas, but African Americans remain segregated, unquote. Furthermore, according to a 2003 report by Harvard's Civil Rights Project, at the end of the 21st century, education for blacks is more segregated than it was in 1968. Moreover, black students are the most likely racial group to attend what researchers call apartheid schools. Schools that are virtually all non-white and where poverty, limited resources, social strife, and health problems abound. 1/6 of America's black students attend these schools. Now remember, this was in 2015. The report also suggests a strong link between racially segregated schools and segregation by class, noting that in heavily segregated schools, the economically disadvantaged account for nearly half of all students. Yet, as previously mentioned, proponents of Black nationalism might welcome this segregated dynamic, though surely not the results. In addition to Black nationalism, the concept of Afrocentricity posits that African paradigms, symbols, myths, and values should constitute the starting point for all Blacks in America. For instance, adopting of African names and fashions and dress, kente cloths, kufi hats, African beads, hairstyles, braids, dreadlocks, afros, food, music, and religiosity. However, despite its popularity, Afrocentricity was not without its critics. Noted African-American professor Henry Louis Gates and white liberal historian Arthur Schlesinger being among the most vocal. Both Gates and Schlesinger argued that despite its intent, and contrary to what proponents of Afrocentricity believed, Afrocentricity might well lead to the establishment of distinctive ethnic communities. Schlesinger even went so far as to label the pedagogy of Afrocentricity as racist, writing, quote, "If a Kleagle of the Ku Klux Klan wanted to use the schools to disable and handicap Black Americans, he could hardly come up with anything more effective than the Afrocentric curriculum," unquote. Now, having made the aforementioned points, it is important to note that the underlying question of how these points detrimentally and broadly affects Black America and America by default looms ever so large. And while the answers appear difficult, considering the data relative to schools and education, there remains the subcutaneous symptoms festering beneath the visual wounds. Moreover, the side effects of the recommended solutions have yet to be addressed, and might never be. If the plight of America were to be determined according to African American contributions, the results gleaned from empirical evidence regarding incomes, wealth, education, and political influence might appear to render America's future bleak. In addition, were the determination real and not imagined, other ethnic groups might well champion their respective "we told you so" attitudes, meaning that African American contributions, or the lack thereof, might lend credibility to the facially neutral segregation of whites and other ethnic groups. However, it is not the facially neutral segregation which causes concern. It is the detrimental effect of self-segregation of Black America. Yet, for us to answer that question, we are required to consider the visual wounds in addition to those not seen. In all probability, Black America has no idea of its self-segregation. No idea at all that it's doing it. It is likely that Black America only sees a neighborhood, only sees unemployment, and sees only crime and despair. What Black America and the rest of America fails to see is how self-segregation affects the health of Blacks in the form of hypertension, mental disease, low birth weights among infants, and practically no political representation. Sans Ferguson, Missouri. What Black America and the rest of Black America fail to see is how self-segregation eclipses the ideological norms of race in neighborhoods. Self-segregation also translates into shunning one's own people. For example, in his 2010 book, Buying Black, The Ebony Experience, Arthur James Klingman Jr. wrote, quote, "There is $850 billion moving through black consumers' hands each year, pardon me, with 90% of that amount going to businesses owned and controlled by non-black businesses." Unquote. Back in the day, blacks created benevolent societies to assist one another in times of hardship. If a member became sick or fell on financially hard times, the society would pitch in with food or visit and clean the affected member's home. Just let me backtrack for a moment. That $850 billion today is a heck of a lot more than it was 10 years ago. When blacks needed one another, blacks loved one another, and vice versa. Moreover, it appeared that blacks enjoyed segregation. What frustrates the situation is that it is virtually impossible to remain clinical regarding this topic. Thinking outside the box takes us only so far before returning us back to the known and the visual wounds. Too often, making factual observation is confused with passing judgment and assigning blame. On the surface, it appears Black America is unconsciously attempting to return that old worn-out suit of integration. Apart from engaging in the things Black Americans believe qualifies them as black, which is attitude and all that other stuff that if you don't do, you're a sellout. Most blacks think of themselves as normal. Yet it just might be the normal of Black America that results in blacks' constructional eviction and self-segregation, intentional or not. Finally, self-segregation, although strengthening the esteem and imagining superiority of others, undermines the foundation of the American economy and its ability to remain globally competitive. Tonight, peeps, we trace lines from Wallace's dust to today's digital flyers, drawing gated boundaries, and not just around space, but around soul. A soul that recognizes that it's a terrible thing to live in a house that was never meant to shelter you. We've also traced the blueprints of exclusion, not just the deeds and its ordinances, but the deeper architecture, the one carved into memory and mortared with myth. Whites only is not just a sign, it's an echo, and echoes linger much longer than truth. A decade ago, I asked if Black America had grown weary of trying on freedom that never fit. Today I ask, who tailored this nation, and who dares to rip the seams? Segregation may not wear its name in public anymore, but it still walks the cul-de-sac. It still screens its tenants. It still decorates its silence with smiling exclusion. And yet, there is a reckoning at the window. It knocks not with fists, but with questions, such as who belongs and why must we prove it? And what happens if we stop asking permission? America may not return integration, but we, the dispossessed, the disillusioned, the undeterred, we will not wait for store credit. We are building our own blueprints, not of walls, but of witness, not of fences, but of fire. I'm your host, Mr. J, and you've been listening to the J Spot Lounge. Make sure you drop a like, subscribe, drop a comment, hit that notification bell. And in the meantime, this lounge remains open. Until then,